I have to discuss it further, but thank you for your well wishes. There's definitely going to be a car replaced. And I do want to make this teaching point to those of you who haven't already heard. That's what I always do, the teaching points. When you buy a car, the number one thing, in addition to reliability, should be safety equipment. And the safety equipment saves your life. The airbags, even side airbags, there are airbags everywhere. And all of the safety equipment is so important to try to get if you can. And I know it gets more expensive, but it's so important. And it's a product of science. It's a product of science and then technology to develop the technology that does operate when you're in a front-end collision, which is what she was. So it was not her fault. Somebody crossed the center. Supposedly had a medical event, crossed the center and hit her head on at about 40 miles per hour. So it was scary, but thank you for your understanding and patience. My lab people, because I couldn't be here Wednesday for the lab exam, I put it online for you. And if you want to turn in your lab packets today, you may do so, or you can keep them until Monday after spring break. So I have to pile them up here, but I'm not trying to pressure you into it. You can wait if you want. Not going to cost you. All right, any other questions we need to take care of? Okay, vertebrates. I'm going to textbooks. If you have textbooks, it would be probably best for you to get them out and kind of follow me, because I'm going to try to zip through it. Plus, I would like, the other thing I would probably have out too, main thing would be the outline for this chapter, which Mickey made for us, and it's very good. So I'm going to kind of coordinate between the two, but start with the focus for here. What is the phylum? And in terms of taxonomy, what is the phylum we're now studying? Chordata. Chordata. And it stands for the notochord. And the notochord is a gristle-like rod running down the back, either in the embryo stage or still present as an adult at some time in their life. What are the other three characteristics? I think we kind of introduced this. The other three characteristics that all chordates have at some time in their life besides the notochord. Aaron?
Pharyngeal slits, post-anal tail, and hollow dorsal nerve cord.
Very good. Those are the four with the notochord also. Okay, so notochord, dorsal nerve cord. Okay, so nerve cord running down the back, the pharyngeal slits, which could have gill slits depending on what the animal is, and then also the post-anal tail. Again, the big extra words that you need to add to all this is at some time in their life. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they all have them as an adult. Where are your gill slits?
Ears.
Okay, kind of go into your ears and kind of your throat and so forth. We don't have gill slits now. Pharyngeal slits, the pharynx is really the throat type of area. We had them though when we were an embryo. And where's your tail? Okay, you got the remains of the tailbone, coccyx down here, but we did have a tail as an embryo. And do we still have a notochord?
It's reduced. It's like gel between the vertical discs of our spine.
Perfect. Yes. You know we've got those discs, those cartilage discs between our vertebrae. which unfortunately degenerate usually as we age or if we've had accidents and things. And as that decreases, then the vertebrae have friction and rub against the vertebrae and causes severe back pain and other issues. So the gelatinous discs are really kind of the long-lasting effect of the notochord, but we don't officially have a notochord now. And we do have a spinal cord, correct? And it is dorsal, and it does run up through the vertebrae. And so we have the dorsal nerve cord still. So that, for instance, is on Mickey's first page. And if you see right here with C, notochord. You're finding this one pretty easy to read too. And then we go into different groups. Now, I put something on the board, I think it was on Monday, about the grouping names that I'm using. For the big groupings, remember I gave out this chart. Did anybody not get this chart? It's a vertebrate comparisons chart. And you can add information to it as you go along. Anybody else see one? Looks like. Good morning. Okay. So are chordates deuterostomes?
Yeah.
How many people say yes? Okay, how many people say no? Okay, the deuterostomes win. Yes, and what's the other invertebrate, main invertebrate group we talked about that is also a deuterostome? What is it? What is it? Echinodermata, spiny skinned invertebrates, those are the starfish, sea urchins and things like that. Okay, so in a deuterostome, first opening in development in the gastrulation part becomes the mouth or the anus. The anus, right. In a protostome, which is all the rest of the invertebrates we studied, the first opening in gastrulation would be the mouth. So kind of clearing cobwebs here a little bit and combining them somewhat. So vertebrates, well, okay, let's look at this. This is a phylogenetic, and again, when you get to phylogenetic charts, they are hypotheses, basically, because we're still trying to decide, evolutionary-wise, we're not 100% sure which one transitions from the other and so forth, but these are our best hypotheses that we have to. These are really called major clades of deuterostomes, that term. There's an ancestral deuterostome, and of course you have the Echinodermata that is up there. And then the big division. Actually, so let's do it this way. Let me get a pen. So Phylochordata starts there, and there are two groups, Cephalochordata, which includes the lancelets, and the Urochordata, which includes the tunicates. And these are both still technically invertebrates. They don't officially have vertebrae. And pictures of those on page 718 here. This is a lancelet. It's in the genus Branchiostoma. It's a cephalocordodon. It's a small invertebrate, but it still maintains all four of the main chordate characteristics, but it doesn't have vertebrae. See how it talks about how it buries itself, it moves backwards and buries its posterior into the sand, and then has this little cirri, and it's the anterior sticking out. Here's and we need to sign in. And to feed itself, you know, to get the food coming out of the water. So that's a lancelet, and it's in that cephalocordata, which stuck in the head. Okay, the tunicates. Kind of interesting, these tunicates, which are Urochordatas, this is a larva, it is almost like a free-swimming tadpole, and it does have the notochord, it's got all those characteristics, and then as an adult, it becomes sessile. It stays in one spot, and it looks like this. So there's a complete transformation. This is actually more of a micrograph of a real adult tunicate. And if there are in-current siphons where the water comes in, it filter feeds, and then there's an ex-current siphon. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the cephalopodas in the phylum Mollusca that also have siphons. And they say the sea squirt, the tunicates also got the name of sea squirt because if something comes by that might threaten it, it actually sprays them. It squirts stuff at them and scares them off. Tries to. Okay. So that's why they're called sea squirts. Okay, so those are the two examples of invertebrates. We're just going to say Cyclostomata here. You do not have to know Myxina and this one. We're just going to put these two, like I have here, hagfish and lampreys. We're just going to put them in the phylum Cyclostomata, not phylum, class Cyclostomata. All right, and the lampreys and the hagfish. And in terms of the lampreys and the hagfish, sorry, this is a hagfish. One of the claims to fame of a hagfish is it secretes lots of slime. And it says here, when attacked by a predator, a hagfish can produce several liters of slime in less than a minute. I mean, it's kind of an interesting little trivia point. But it does not have vertebrae. It has all the chordate characteristics, but it never turns it into vertebrae. It says they can measure up to 60 centimeters in length. Most are bottom-dwelling scavengers that feed on worms and sick or dead fish. But in terms of technology, biologists and engineers are investigating the properties of hagfish slime as a model for developing a space-filling gel that could be used, for instance, to stop bleeding during surgery. Interesting application possibility. Lampreys, which I've mentioned before, the main thing about a lamprey, it's sort of eel-like looking too, but is this mouth right here. Just like with the hagfish, if you look at the mouth is circular. With the lamprey, most lampreys are parasitic, they're ectoparasites, that they actually do attach to a fish, and there's a grasping teeth in there that they hold on to the fish and then they suck the blood and juices out of the fish and get their nutrients that way. And it does talk about the story about the Great Lakes being infected by lamprey. A lot of times they will, when they're younger, they will stay in freshwater areas and then they'll move to marine areas, saltwater areas as adults. The Great Lakes, of course, are a connector. Lakes are technically freshwater, but at the other end, where it dumps in, there is ocean that it eventually can drain into in the eastern part of the United States. Okay, so the other thing here is that these are called cyclostomes because of their circular mouth. They are jawless. Okay, so jawless is a big characteristic of these. Now, from there on, notice if you look to the left, you're going down, the rest of these are going to be jawled, jaws. And the first class, so if we say, if we say these are classes, you know, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Class is Chondrichthyes, sharks, rays, skates. And they pretty much maintain a cartilage skeleton throughout their life. They are, however, they are, by the way, these are vertebrates. I'm going to call the vertebrate distinction subphylum, because it's the kingdom Chordata, subphylum Vertebrata, but would not include these two groups up here. It would be individual invertebrates. Class Cyclostomata was first, then we get to, and these are jawless up here, and then now we're going to jaws, and notice it says it here, so you get the vertebrae, these have vertebrae, and of course all the rest of these are going to have vertebrae. And Chondrichthyes, cartilage, is what chondrict refers to. By the way, if you look at Chondrichthyes and then instead of you having to know this and this and this, we're going to kind of call it Osteichthyes as the class. So we've got Chondrichthyes and Osteichthyes, and this is sounding a little fishy, isn't it? So guess what course you would sign up for if you wanted to specialize in fish? Ichthyology. And guess if you've ever been an aquarium enthusiast, what is one of those? I think it's fungus. Ick. There's a fungal disease that fish can get. It's called ick. And so you have drops you can put in to try to prevent the ick.
Yeah, because it kills them if they get it.
Does it ruin their swim bladders, I think, or something like
It
that?
literally eats away at their skin almost, and then gets in. We've had several fish at my house before.
And you contaminate the aquarium.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
mess.
get the whole food.
Okay, so fishy. So we're starting in the water, right? So we got gnathostomes are vertebrates that have jaws. So gnath means jaws, and stoma is an opening. So there's an opening. So there's a mouth. Okay, so the rest of these from now on are all going to be under sort of a clad of math of stones. And this is kind of watch. Okay, I need to tell you this. Do you see? Okay, on page 718, do you see where this talks about early vertebrate evolution? Wherever I have a line, a diagonal line drawn across, I'm not going to get you to know any of that. It's extra stuff that I think we have enough already. And then also up here. I did leave origin of bone. There is a mineralization after the chondrichthyes. There is a mineralization of the cartilage skeleton into bone, and that process is called ossification. So ossify, anything ossi or osteo has to do with bone. Okay. By the way, I should mention with the sharks, the Raisin's case, let me find that area. Here's, okay, let's go to page 721. There's a shark up here. One of the things about a shark, and it's pretty streamlined, but one of the characteristics of a shark is that it has a ventral mouth. You know, a lot of osteichthyes, the mouth is like out here, anterior, as they swim as a bilateral organism. But the ventral mouth, and there are some interesting things about the sharks in that their teeth, they have lots of rows of teeth. You know that. You've seen inside shark jaws and displays and things. Their teeth actually, whenever there's one that breaks out, and a lot of times they lose teeth all the time, and so you find sharks' teeth around the ocean. And as the teeth drop out, there are layers of teeth behind ready to come forward. They keep replacing the teeth so they don't run out of the teeth.
I actually have a little box of shark teeth that I bought from Newport Aquarium. They sell them in the gift shop there.
Yeah, they are kind of a collector's item, and they have kind of like serrated knives, you know, on the teeth. Remember that word homologous we've talked about is that when structures are built similarly, but they may have different functions, so they have similar origin. Guess what the scales of a shark look like under the microscope? Not exactly like a snake. Like their teeth. They look like their teeth. So even if it's a dead shark, you have to be careful you don't cut yourself. Like if this is the anterior and this is the posterior, if you're going to slide your finger over it, you want to go from anterior to posterior. Because if you go from posterior to anterior, you can cut yourself. Because they are like little shark teeth. It's kind of an interesting little trait of sharks. And it is true that they do, and your book does talk about very briefly, the physiology or the functioning of why sharks need to keep moving in order to breathe. Now, not all sharks are predators that need to be feared. There are only some kinds of sharks, of course, like in Jaws, that need to be feared, but not all sharks are bad. In fact, you can even buy some sharks, some little sharks that go in their aquarium tanks. So there are many, many different types of sharks. I will also say we were talking about ichthyology. He was a young man at the time when in my early days of teaching, that I worked with as a colleague. And he is now, a long time ago, he's been a PhD and his specialty is he's an ichthyologist. Okay, so he actually has gone in and he does all this research. His name is Chris Ingersoll, and you can find he's got research out there and about ichthyology. People really do go into those specialties. And southern stingray, of course, a stingray is a more flattened fish. And again, its mouth is ventral. Its skeleton is still cartilage. There are stingrays and there are other types of rays. And Irwin, the famous Steve Irwin, the famous alligator, crocodile person.
He got killed.
Yeah, he so sad. He wrestled all those snakes. He wrestled alligators, crocodiles, everything, and then he happens to be swimming, getting ready for a shoot for the show, and he runs into a stingray. The ray got him in the abdomen, or I don't know, it was chest, or it could be thorax. And as in time of panic, as trained as he was and as knowledgeable as he was, he pulled it out. And he might have still lived if he had not pulled it out. Because then I think he bled to death, and it really did do a lot of massive harm to a lot of massive organs. Yes, that's true, but if the people could have gotten to him and gotten proper medical care. And you can't what if, but it's such a shame because he was such a talented guy. I mean, you either loved him or you really didn't like him. I mean, he was kind of, his comedy was, but he did it live with animals. So we'll leave him a legacy, and of course his family is carrying on for him. And they spotted ratfish, also called chimeras. These are also chondrichthyes. It talks about some of the detail over here. There are some terms here that don't necessarily need to be just with the chondrichthyes group, but as we go through the whole chordate group, there are some terms you need to know, and this is how they bring. So if you're taking notes, this would be how they bring their young into the world. There are three main types. Oviparous, parenting. Okay, ova, so what do you think they do?
Eggs.
They lay eggs, okay. Oviparous. The second one is a mouthful, but it's ovoviviparous, which they retain the fertilized eggs in the oviduct, and the embryos develop into young that are born after hatching within the uterus. So they actually look like they're giving live birth, but they're actually hatching from eggs inside. So there are snakes and things that are also ovoviviparous. And so if you have oviparous on this end, you have viviparous on the other end, which is more of a placental thing like what we have, where the young are actually maturing inside the mother's uterus, and there's an exchange of material there. And so that's good to know. A lot of animals, yes, Brittany?
Did you, what did you say this, like, what are these different types of what?
The way in which young are brought into the world. So it's parenting type. How they're brought into the world. Either by egg laying, either by the eggs hatching inside and then young actually coming out of the cloacal opening or whatever opening they exit from. And third is viviparous, which viva life. They're born alive because after they've developed, like what we do with placental, as in placental mammals. do the viviparous thing. So, what you also find with a lot of animals and group, as well as many reptiles, birds, the actual opening through which excretory products, digestive products, and reproductive products all go through the same opening. And cloaca in Latin means common opening. So cloaca is the opening to the outside. C-L-O-A-C-A, cloaca. I think it's right here. A common chamber that is a single opening to the outside from three systems. And I can ask you on a test, what are the three systems? So I could ask you. Digestive products, that would be the excretory products, which would be the nitrogen waste, and also the reproductive products. This is a ray fin fish, and you see kind of spines and kind of stiff spines, rays. This is a trout, but it could be a perch, it could be a lot of other. Your normal fish that you think of is probably a fin fish. And then over here at the bottom, how there's more of a lobe to the fins that's more flattened and meaty. That's a lobe fin fish. This is that coelacanth that they thought was extinct, and there are still some around. And that's a lobe fin fish. So, and actually, when they talk about it, they talk about coelacanths as with the lobe fins, the coelacanths, the lungfish, which we talked about. The lungfish are some of those fish that can actually get out of water, and they have some lungs, and they can actually have the stiffened spines on the fins, and they can kind of hop and go from a dried up pond to an area where there is water. And there's another branch that's called pteropods, and dissect the word. Terra means what?
Earth,
Earth, land, and pods mean
foot.
foot. So the tetrapods would not necessarily be fish, but they would lead to all the rest of the chordates, right? The reptile, the amphibians, the reptiles, and on. So we're going to study it, particularly in lab. We're going to really emphasize the different structures within the fish. I would like to point out a couple that are fish, osteoichthyes. You see this line on the side? It's a row of pitted scales on the side of the fish, and they're on both sides, and it's called a lateral line. And that lateral line is sensory for picking up vibrations in the water. So if you've ever went fishing as a child, or any time, with a parent or somebody who's an avid fisher person, and you are playing in the water in front of where they're fishing, and they say, no, don't do that, because that splashing is picked up by the lateral line of the fish, and they go the opposite direction. Or even loud voices and things of that sort can be picked up through the medium of the water. So it's a sort of a specialized. Now, you see this little, let's say it's sort of like a what?
The swim bladder is just like an air pocket, like an air sac.
It is. It's like an air sac. It's either called an air bladder or a swim bladder. And osteichthyes have a swim bladder. Chondrichthyes do not. The osteichthyes, the ray fin fish in particular, ever notice in your aquarium, they can hover. And you know how they do that? By taking in and out gases between the blood supply of the fish and the swim or air bladder. And when fish get diseased, oftentimes it affects their swim bladder, and they end up swimming and then falling. Their air bladder is not working. So the air bladder allows them to adjust to depths without killing themselves, because any of you have scuba divers, are going deep down to be very careful about coming up.
Yeah, you have to keep releasing the pressure.
Creates like a break,
So you don't get the bends, that's what they used to call it, which is nitrogen. As the lower down you go in the water, or whether it's in caves or whatever, you have more air on top of it pushing down. So you have more pressure on you. So at 3,000 feet, you have quite a bit of pressure plus all the air above, plus all the water above you with the weight. And so as you go from 3,000 feet deep to come up to the surface, you just want to come up real fast, right? No. You want to take it very slowly, because you have to have that adjustment, because if you come up too fast, then you'll have nitrogen just pouring into the blood supply. They used to put you in these big, crazy looking chambers, compression chambers, to try to save people because they've come up too fast. And so the air bladder is sort of their own built-in adaptation for how to adjust to different depths. Particularly they're looking for food. Particularly if they're carnivore and they eat meat, catching food, going different depths real fast, or escaping. So the lateral line and the swim bladder are two unique things. Also, there's a gill cover called an operculum. The gills are on the side, and the way most ray fin fish breathe is that, fish are always opening their mouths. Well, when they open their mouth, their gill cover is closed. When they close their mouth, their gill cover opens. The water comes in and then it goes over the gills, and then the oxygen is taken out of the gills, and the carbon dioxide is also put back into the water that goes out due to the cell respiration situation. Some people can really do a good fish imitation. Not me. And you've got other examples of fish that are shown here. Lionfish, for instance, has actually venom in the spines, so that's a lot of times when you see bright colors, nature kind of says beware. But not all beautiful fish. There's so many beautiful green fish, but the lionfish can be deadly. Here's a seahorse, obviously not a horse. It really is an osteophytes. It's got a skeleton. What is the unique thing about parenting?
The male reproduces the offspring.
Reproduces it?
Or produces the offspring.
Okay, yeah, the male has the dominant role in parenting, carries the eggs. Once the eggs are actually laid, if you want to say, then the male puts them in his little pouch and he carries them around and protects them. Hippocampus
It's
is
actually
the genus name.
the part of your brain known as the hippocampus is named because it resembles the
It looks
shape
like
of a
it.
seahorse.
Thank you. That is a great correlation to remember, because we are going to the nervous system at some point down the road with the human body. Yes, and then that's a good thing. It is a good thing. Okay, let's go to page 724. This is a fossilized, we think, they're calling it a fishapod. There isn't a formal name for it here, now that you know that, but they think this could be a transitional form between fish
Came onto land.
and amphibians. Right, that's a possibility. Tetrapods have 4 feet. Okay, so we're now moving on to land. And let's just go to page 726. Then if you look at the top, remember, we scratched out these three, and we just put osteichthyes and lobefin fish. You don't have to know those three names. Now we're down to half water, half land. Not exactly, but they're still, this group of amphibians, they are the first group to enter or come onto land and spend most of their time, but still tied for the most part to water because of reproduction. Their eggs are soft, they have no shells, they have to be laid in water and usually fertilized in water. There are exceptions, okay, but or a gelatinous, some sort of gelatinous mess around them. But for the most part, they have to have external fertilization. I talked about amplexus right the other day, AMPLEXUS, where it's a modified, more efficient form of external fertilization with the frog and his, large thumb helping to press down, get the eggs out of the female, and then he sprays his sperm over top of them. It's still external fertilization. Okay, when I think of amphibians, they divided up into salamanders, frogs, and in the frog group includes toads. So what they're talking about are salamanders that have tails, and the sort of side bending. When they move, they kind of move, their body moves side to side. They have slimy, moist-looking skin. They're found around bodies of water, so they get back into water, and because they also breathe through their skin. Frogs and toads. Toads are the most terrestrial. Around here, Claremont County toads are usually sort of short, squatty, brownish looking, got warts all over the body. Okay, and then the frogs are usually a little more streamlined. They're usually more greenish, and they're found closer to bodies of water usually. They're all in the same group. They all have the same type of reproduction. So they don't have tails as adults, but they do, remember, as tadpoles. And then Sicilians, these are the legless and nearly blind. Here's a picture of a legless amphibian. It looks like a salamander, right? But it's got all these segments. And it really kind of looks like an earthworm, or it looks like a snake. So it's sometimes hard to really tell what you have. These mainly burrow in around leaf matter. We're probably not going to run into too many of those around here because most of them inhabit tropical areas. Most amphibians are found in damp habitats, such as swamps or rainforests. Biologists have documented an alarming decline in amphibian populations in low locations throughout the world. There appear to be several causes, including the spread of a disease causing chytrid fungus, habitat loss, because of all the building and getting rid of natural streams and things, climate change, and pollution. They're very susceptible to pollution, like if somebody's dumping some chemical upstream and it gets into the water, they're just very sensitive. In some cases, declines have become extinctions in different species. A recent study indicates that at least 9 amphibian species have become extinct since 1980. More than 100 other species have not been seen since that time, and are considered possibly extinct. All right, the next group, amniots. We're going to a whole group from now on where their egg can be laid on land. It has a shell around it. It has its own swimming pool inside. It has its own protection, its own food, its own exchange, the membranes for exchange. Okay, I'm going to give you a claim to fame statement. The development of the amniotic egg is probably the greatest development for terrestrial life. The development of the amniotic egg is probably the greatest development to allow totally terrestrial land life. So amniots are tetrapods, 4 feet, that have a terrestrially adapted egg, the amniots. Amniots are named for their major derived character of the clad, the amniotic egg, which contain 4 specialized membranes. Okay, listen carefully to this and get these 4 specialized membranes in this egg are the amnion, the chorion, the yolk sac, and the allantois. Okay, and here it is illustrated. Anybody studied the placental situation of placental mammals, of a human carrying a baby? Do those membranes sound familiar? The amniotic sac?
Yeah, that bursts when we were born.
Right. And it's like the bubble membrane holds the fluid in which the baby is, and then the chorion helps to make the placenta, which is the actual exchange between the mother and the developing embryo and the fetus. And the allantois has a similar function in terms of helping to get rid of waste materials, exchanging it. And there's a reduced yolk sac in mammals from the reptiles, because they're viviparous, they're held in a placenta. But you have a similar naming and similar functions. Also, in addition, amniots have acquired another key adaptation to life on land. For example, amniots use their rib cage to help ventilate their lungs. This method is more efficient than the throat-based ventilation through which amphibians sometimes use. You will find that frogs have, as we dissect a frog, frogs have lungs, but they don't use them all that much. They're not really well developed, but they do a throat-based thing where you see air coming in and out here. It's sort of like singing. Those of us who unfortunately sing from the throat, which we're not supposed to do, or those that sing from the diaphragm, which is really the way you're supposed to sing. Okay, it's a similar thing, whereas the ventilation of getting air in and out is you have the muscles of the ribs, which help to have the rib cage come up and down, along with, this group doesn't have a diaphragm yet, but we have a diaphragm, which is the main muscle that allows for a difference in pressure that pulls the air in. So, reptiles. They are, as a group, now I'm going to tell you there are exceptions. As a group, they are ectothermic, which means they're cold-blooded. There's also another word, if you're into words, called poikilothermic. But they're ectothermic, which means they are approximately the same temperature as their environment. Reptiles regulate their temperature by behavioral adaptations. If they're cold, they come out on a rock and they sunbathe. If it's really cold out, they burrow somewhere so that they have insulation to help keep them warm. So it's behavioral. They also have, we have now graduated to a group that has internal fertilization. The amniotic egg is obvious, it's one of the big features of the reptiles, and they are fully terrestrial. So what are we talking about? We're talking about, okay, see this section? I'm gonna put a line through page 730, down to at least here where it says turtles. If you really want to be technical and practical, we know what a turtle looks like. It has a dorsal shell, it has a ventral shell, a more flattened ventral shell, usually a more curved if it's in dorsal shell. If it's in water, you'll see it not so much. It'd be more flattened. Terrapins, turtles, and tortoises. True land-dwelling turtle-like animals are really tortoises. Freshwater turtle-like animals are really what? They're terrapins. And the true marine saltwater turtles are really turtles. But anyway, so the Galapagos tortoises would be like 2 meters or more big. Really, they're tortoises. That's not in the book, that's just free information. So you have the turtles, Euopteras, snakes, crocodiles, and then you know from the evolutionary standpoint, we're now saying that the birds are an offshoot of the reptiles. One point I learned from many people. Crocodiles and alligators. Alligators typically have a shorter snout. The crocodiles, I think. The crocodiles tend to have a longer snout, and they have that overbite where the teeth come out on the outside. But anyway, that's just useful knowledge. Thank you very much. Have a fantastic spring break. We'll finish up vertebrates, and then we'll go to the chapter. Please refer to the